Hello, this is Greg Wan, the Executive Director of the South Atlantic Council, and this is presentation 4 out of 5 presentations we have on Cobia. And again, we're suggesting that you all go through and watch these in order. And we've broken them up in segments to help make it easier for you to follow and not have a whole ton of stuff to go through at one time. And all of this is being posted in preparation for our Q&A meeting May 9th in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. That Q&A meeting will be webcast as well. So I want to talk about Amendment 20B and the closure. And just to review Amendment 20B, and some of this was included in a previous presentation, but these regulations became effective March 1, 2015, and they implemented the CDAR and SSC values. We established 2 migratory groups. The Gulf Migratory Group is from Texas through the Florida East Coast, and then the Atlantic Group is now Georgia through North Carolina. We kept our 98% rec, 2% commercial allocation. Based on the average landings 2000 to 2008 and 2006 through 2008. MSY is 808,000 pounds. We've got OFL or overfishing values there. And the annual catch limit, ACL, we set equal to the ABC, which is the maximum that we can set. That was 690,000 in 2015, 670 in 2016 onwards. And then we split that into a rec and commercial ACL. The accountability measures, which is an important point, we didn't make any changes to that. So on the commercial side, you track and close, you pay back if it's overfished and the catch exceeds the total ACL. The recreational accountability measure, and again, that's required by the Magnuson Act, is if the recreational and total annual catch limits are exceeded, shorten the following season, and you'll see in a moment why we have to do this. And you use 1 year first, and then average 2 years, then a moving average at 3, unless the ACLs change, and then you restart, and that's where we are. Similar to the commercial payback of overfished and the catch exceeds the total ACL. We didn't make any changes to our existing regulations, 33-inch fork length, 2 per person per day with 1 day limit, and you have to land them intact. So we monitored those. The National Marine Fisheries Service is in charge of monitoring the catch. You can get the catch statistics at this link at the top of this page. And on the recreational side, the rec ACL for the Atlantic Group was 630 in 2015. Catches were 1.54 million, so we're way over the recreational ACL. That triggers, and over the ACL, and that triggers the recreational 2016 season to be shortened. Commercial, we were under their ACL in 2015 for the Atlantic, and people are very interested in the Gulf portion that's on the Florida East Coast. We've had questions about shifting allocation, and we can't. That's a separate biological stock. But the East Coast of Florida, the rec ACL is 830,000 pounds. The rec catch was 372,000. Commercial was 70,000, catch was under it. So for 2016, the recreational annual catch limit is 620,000 pounds for the Atlantic, 860,000 pounds in the Gulf. And those stay in place 2016 on. And we don't have any estimates of recreational catch thus far in 2016. Commercial, the ACL for the Atlantic is 50,000 pounds. Thus far, we've had a little over 5,000 pounds landed. And for the East Coast of Florida, that portion of the Gulf Group, the ACL is 70,000 pounds, and we've got 17,000, a little over 17,000 pounds. So why are we taking action? Well, this is all laid out in existing amendments and is in regulations on the book. But the recreational ACL was decreased from a little over 1.4 million pounds, covering the area from Florida Keys through New York, to 630,000 pounds in 2015 for the area of Georgia through New York, based on the new stock ID and CDAR 28. The rec catch, as I just said, exceeded it 129% over the Rec ACL, and it's also over the total ACL. So the accountability measure was triggered. So the 2016 season is being shortened. And in calculating the length of the season, the National Marine Fisheries Service is aiming for an ACT of 500,000 pounds. And we know the recreational catches are variable, so if they're higher than we expect, then they'll be above this ACT, but hopefully not above the recreational ACL, which is a limit. The Council is working on a framework to change the accountability measure, look at bag limits, size limits, seasons to prevent a closure, and there's a separate presentation with details on that. And in addition, the Council is asking the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission to consider at their May 2nd through 5th, 2016 meeting if they're interested in developing a joint or complementary plan for state waters. This Cobia fishery is a pulse fishery with high catches in state waters, and they're variable, and it varies by state. Some states have higher federal landings than state landing. So some questions have arisen, and we've got more details, answers to these questions posted on the same page where these presentations are. It's a Q&A for Cobia, and you can get more detail there. But these are many questions that have been raised by council members and other members of the public. So the 2015 estimate, well, the question, how does the 2015 landing spike compare to long-term trends in the fishery? The 2015 estimate of landings in MRIP, the Marine Recreational Information Program, is the highest on record. Hypothetical recreational overfishing level, so we have an overfishing level, and we just took 92% of that to calculate an approximate recreational OFL level, and that's shown here in the red. The squares are the catches. This is the recreational catch. A plus B1, A is observed, B1 is not observed. The recreational ACL is in green, and then we show the ACT here on the bottom. And so you can see that catches have exceeded the recreational ACL, but that ACL was only implemented in 2015. But just in terms of looking back to see what effect we've had on the stock, you can see that we exceeded that in earlier years as well. Is there any evidence that the 2015 recreational spike is an anomaly, perhaps related to a spike in landings in a single area or to substantial changes in average weight? There's no evidence that the increase is narrow, and landings increased in all states in pounds as well as numbers. The numbers were up in 2015 over 2014 by 2.9 times higher in Georgia, 3.6 in South Carolina, 1.6 in North Carolina, and 3.4 in Virginia. And if you look at trips that were made, targeted trips, those are trips that reported targeting cobia, increased from about 165,000 in 2014 to a little over 206,500 in 2015. Successful trips also increased from about 41,000 to 60,000. So the percent successful trips increased from 25% in 2014 to 29% in 2015. So they're making more trips and more successful trips. And so what about weight? There is indication of a slightly higher mean weight in 2015. The 2015 mean weight is high, but this doesn't appear to be the sole explanation for the increase in landing. And you can see here a general trend towards increasing sizes. Is there any evidence that the 2015 recreational catch estimate is particularly uncertain? We use what's called the PSE, or percent squared error. This measures the statistical uncertainty and error in the estimation. It's calculated to compare cross species regardless of how much is caught or the frequency they're encountered in the survey. And you want to have lower values. And so the catches of cobia in Georgia and South Carolina are relatively lower and more variable. And you can see this, the Georgia numbers are higher at sometimes 100 PSE. The South Carolina ones, the triangles, are that high at times, but in recent years they've come down more. But if you look at North Carolina, it's in the red square, and Virginia, the black circle, you can see that those PSEs are much better, down the range of 20 to 40. And certainly in the last several years, they've come down. So it doesn't look like there's an increase in uncertainty in the catch. Did overfishing occur during 2004 to 2010 when there are numerous years of landings exceeding the estimated recreational OFL? So this is the same chart we were looking at before, but we've added this black line is now a measure of the fishing mortality each year as compared to the fishing mortality at MSY. And as long as that ratio stays below 1, this gray line here, we're not overfishing. And so the stock assessment did not show a period when overfishing occurs, and you can see that here. This may seem counterintuitive since landings were so much higher than the benchmarks and the MSY, but this is what's called fishing down, and I'll show you this in a moment. So looking at this, you can see that we came very close to overfishing in 2006. And in terms of looking at just this estimated recreational OFL here, we've been above it for quite a number of years, and the 2015 value is very high. It's above the overfishing value. So again, looking at this biomass and this issue of fishing down, this is an estimate of the spawning stock biomass as compared to the biomass when the stock is at MSY. And we want this to be above 1. If it gets below 1, then you're in an overfished state. And you can see that in the 1990s, the spawning stock biomass was as high as a little over 2.5 times the spawning stock biomass at MSY. And so this extremely high biomass supported those high catches. However, removing more than the average stock has a cost. That cost is what we describe as fishing down. And you can see what happens as you have those high fishing rates. You're driving the biomass down. You're harvesting that excess biomass. And you can see that decline. The terminal estimate here, the last year in the stock assessment, is the lowest, and it's at 1.29, so it's just above this 1, which would be an overfished level. So over this time series, the stock went from about a little over 2.5 times to somewhere around 1.3 times. So we basically removed about 53% of the spawning stock biomass as we've been fishing this stock down. Is there a reason for concern and precaution with cobia? It certainly appears so. The terminal assessment results indicate declining biomass, and you saw that in that previous chart, and peak fishing mortality rates, and we showed you those bumping up against the limit. Recreational landings, excuse me, for 7 of the last 12 years exceed the hypothetical recreational share of the equilibrium MSY. Landings have increased considerably in the last decade. Those from 2004 to 2014 are twice those from the earlier time period. It seems unlikely that the APIS or the new MRIP sampling methodology will resolve this issue. Excuse me. Based on the use of landings relative to OFL as a measure of overfishing for the years since the terminal assessment year, overfishing did occur in 2015. And you see that in this chart here. So there's some concern biologically for this stock, and we need to make sure our catches don't exceed our recreational ACL in particular. That's where we've had the issue. And so how do we do this while we prevent having another closure in 2017? Well, the council is working on an amendment, and there's a separate presentation that goes into more detail. But we have a seasonal issue to look at. And the blue line is all Atlantic landings, and you can see that it peaks in May and June, and these are 2-month waves because that's how the recreational data are collected. July and August is still high, and then we're down in September and October. But if you look at particularly Virginia state waters, you can see that their peak is in July and August. And so this June 20 closure really has a disproportionate impact on Virginia. And so we're looking at ways to address that issue. Preliminary analyses for Virginia and North Carolina state waters show that a low vessel limit and a higher size limit can prevent a closure. These are some preliminary analyses that were done. They assume Virginia regulatory changes are implemented on May 1 and North Carolina's on May 23rd. Any new regs we were to put in federal waters or South Carolina and Georgia state waters could potentially extend the season. And so we want to make sure you all comment on how different ways that the council could look at to prevent a closure. But you can see that if you get down to a 1-fish vessel limit with a 45-inch size limit, then there would not be a closure. And remember, we've got some biological issues here that we're concerned about too. And so it may be prudent to look at something like this in order to prevent a closure and those associated social and economic impacts. And so that's it for this presentation. And again, we urge you to look at all of them in order, and then look forward to seeing you at that meeting on May 9th, or have you join us on the webinar. Thank you.